Am I the asshole? I'll admit, I'm not the kind of guy women usually fall head over heels for. I've spent most of my life flying under the radar. Average looks, average job, average everything. I work as a software engineer in a small Midwest town where life feels like a predictable loop of coding, coffee, and crashing on the couch to binge whatever show is trending. Relationships? Let's just say my romantic resume is full of first dates that never led to seconds. But everything changed when I took a work trip to California. Picture this. I'm at a networking event in Los Angeles, nervously holding a beer while pretending I know what the hell blockchain actually is. That's when I saw her. She walked into the room like she was glowing, long, wavy blonde hair, a smile so radiant it felt like the room got a little brighter, and the kind of confidence you see in movie stars. She wasn't just beautiful, she was mesmerizing, the kind of woman you could spend a lifetime describing and still never quite capture. To my utter disbelief, she noticed me. It started with small talk. She was there with a friend, bored out of her mind, and decided I looked harmless enough to chat with. Turns out, we clicked. Her name was Vanessa. She was funny, charming, and despite her movie star looks, surprisingly down to earth. I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in ages. When the event ended, I half-jokingly offered to show her the best burger place in the city, as if I knew anything about LA. To my shock, she said yes. That night turned into one of those magical evenings you only see in rom-coms. We walked along the Santa Monica Pier, ate way too much greasy food, and talked about everything and nothing. She told me about her fast-paced life, her love for adventure, and how she felt like no one really knew her. And then, just before midnight, she kissed me. What followed was a whirlwind romance, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Her energy was intoxicating. She made me feel alive in a way I didn't think was possible. Our time together was fiery, passionate, and unforgettable. She was breathtaking. A goddess, honestly. But all good things must come to an end, right? After 2 days, my trip was over. I went back to my quiet life, convinced that whatever Vanessa and I had was just a fleeting fling. I mean, come on, a woman like her, with a guy like me? No way she'd want anything more. I told myself to move on, to enjoy the memories and leave it at that, but then, a week later, my phone buzzed. It was her. She said she'd be in my city for business and asked if I wanted to meet up. My heart raced. Vanessa wanted to see me again? How could I say no to that? When Vanessa came to town, I was a bundle of nerves. I couldn't believe she was actually here, standing in front of me in a tailored blazer and heels, looking even more stunning than I remembered. We went to dinner at this fancy Italian place downtown, a spot I'd never normally go to. But for her, it felt right. She told me about her business trip, dropping hints about the glamorous projects she was involved in, and every now and then, she'd throw in a compliment that made my cheeks burn. I couldn't believe this was my life. At one point, as we were sharing a slice of tiramisu, I looked across the table and realized something. I didn't want this to end. I didn't want to go back to my life where women like Vanessa only existed on TV screens. I didn't want to wake up tomorrow and have this feel like just another great memory. That's when I did something impulsive, something completely out of character. "Vanessa," I said, my voice a little shaky. "This might sound crazy, but will you marry me?" The words hung in the air like a firework frozen mid-explosion. Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought I'd just made the biggest fool of myself. But then, a smile tugged at her lips. "Wow," she said, leaning back in her chair. "You don't waste any time, do you?" "I mean it," I stammered. "I've never met anyone like you. You make me feel alive. I know it's fast, but I don't want to let you go." She hesitated, her expression a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. Then she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's do it." I couldn't believe it. Vanessa, the woman of my dreams, had just agreed to marry me. The next few weeks were a blur of wedding planning. She suggested we keep it small and intimate, just close friends and family. I didn't mind. Honestly, I would have married her in a courthouse if it meant making her mine. But as we spent more time together, little cracks began to show. Vanessa had an air of mystery about her. She was constantly getting calls and texts from people she wouldn't name, and whenever I asked about her work, she gave vague answers. She traveled often, sometimes for days at a time, and though she always returned with stories of meetings and deals, something felt off. One night, as we were picking out flower arrangements, I decided to ask her about her life before we met. "So, what exactly do you do?" I asked, casually, hoping to sound more curious than suspicious. She glanced up from her laptop, her expression unreadable. "I told you, I'm in media." "Right, but what kind of media?" She paused, then gave a small laugh. "Let's just say I'm in the entertainment business. You know, behind the scenes." I nodded, pretending to understand, but a tiny voice in the back of my head started whispering questions I wasn't ready to ask. The closer we got to the wedding, the more those questions gnawed at me. And then, one day, I stumbled across something that made my stomach drop. About 2 weeks before the wedding, Vanessa invited me to a casual dinner with some of her friends. She said it would be a chance for me to meet the people who mattered most to her. I was nervous, but eager. I wanted to know more about her life, and this felt like the perfect opportunity. Her friends were a mix of glamorous and eccentric, the kind of people you'd expect to see at a rooftop party in LA, rather than a cozy dinner in my sleepy Midwestern town. They were loud, confident, and talked about things I barely understood: brands, projects, and places that felt a million miles from my reality. But there was one woman who caught my attention. Her name was Crystal, and she seemed different from the others. Quiet, watchful, almost tense. When Vanessa went to the kitchen to grab dessert, Crystal leaned toward me. "Do you really know who Vanessa is?" she asked, her voice low. I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "She's not who you think she is," Crystal said, her eyes darting to the doorway where Vanessa had disappeared. "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but you deserve to know the truth before it's too late." Before I could press her for more, Vanessa came back, holding a tray of fancy pastries. Crystal straightened in her chair, her expression neutral, but her words stuck with me like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Later that night, after Vanessa had fallen asleep, I decided to dig a little deeper. I started with a simple Google search. Vanessa, her last name Media. At first, I didn't find anything, but then, buried in the results, I stumbled across a forum thread that mentioned her name. My heart pounded as I clicked the link. What I found, well, let's just say it painted a picture of her life that was very different from the one she'd shared with me. There were photos, glossy, provocative shots that left little to the imagination, and a long list of projects she'd apparently been involved in. Projects that weren't exactly family-friendly. My head spun. Was this real? Had I somehow missed the signs? The next morning, I tried to act normal, but the weight of what I'd discovered made it impossible to focus. Vanessa noticed. "What's wrong?" she asked, tilting her head. "Nothing," I lied. "Come on," she said, leaning closer. "I can tell something's bothering you." I hesitated, debating whether to confront her. But before I could say anything, my phone buzzed. It was a call from my best friend, Eric. "Hey man," he said when I answered. "We need to talk. I met Vanessa yesterday and I don't think she's who you think she is." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Just look, I don't want to ruin anything, but someone sent me a link. It's about her. Check your email." When the call ended, I opened the email. It was a link to a video, and as I clicked play, my worst fears were confirmed. The woman I was about to marry wasn't just in the entertainment business. She was the entertainment business. I was shattered. There's no other way to describe it. The videos Eric sent me left me numb, staring at my screen in disbelief. Video after video, each one showing Vanessa with different men, her smile radiant, her movements confident and practiced. She was a star, all right, but not the kind of star I had imagined. I couldn't look for long. My stomach churned, and I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. I couldn't believe this was my fiancée. The woman I'd poured my heart into, the woman I was supposed to marry tomorrow. The day passed in a blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think straight. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't let this fester. I had to talk to her. No matter how painful it was, I needed answers. That evening, I sat Vanessa down. She must have noticed something was wrong because she tilted her head and gave me a curious smile. "What's going on, babe?" I took a deep breath, my throat dry. "Vanessa, I know. I know about your job, the videos." Her smile faltered, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. She set her glass down on the table and folded her hands in her lap. "I see," she said quietly. "I was hoping this wouldn't come up. Not like this, at least." "How could it not come up?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Vanessa, I'm marrying you. Don't you think I deserved to know? Why didn't you tell me?" She leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. "Because I knew what would happen. If I'd told you when we first met, you would have walked away. You wouldn't have given me a chance, and you'd never know the real me. That's why." "I'm still trying to figure out who the real you is," I said bitterly. Vanessa flinched, but held her ground. "Look, I didn't tell you because I didn't think it mattered. It's just a job. It's nothing personal. It's work, like any other." "Work?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're calling that work?" "Yes," she said firmly. "It's a business, a very lucrative one. I don't see anything wrong with it. It's cinema, it's art, the art of love, of passion. It's aesthetically pleasing, and yes, sometimes explicit, but it's not as dirty as people think. I'm respected in my field, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished." I stared at her, stunned by her calm demeanor. She was so unapologetic, so matter-of-fact about it all. Seeing my reaction, her tone softened. "I didn't do all the movies, you know. I have standards, and I've been in this industry long enough to know how to separate myself from the work. It's not who I am, it's just what I do." My shock was still there, but her voice, so gentle and sincere, made me stay. I couldn't just walk away, not yet. "I don't get it," I muttered. "How did you even end up there?" Vanessa sighed and sat back, her gaze distant. "It's a long story," she said. "I grew up in a tiny apartment in Eastern Europe. We didn't have much, but we were happy. Then my parents decided to move to the States for a better life. It didn't work out. My dad left us, and my mom and I were barely scraping by. I started modeling in high school to help pay the bills. And then, well, this offer came along. The money was life-changing, and at the time, it felt like the only way to survive." "And you stayed in it?" I asked, still struggling to wrap my head around it. "At first, it was just about survival," she admitted. "But over time, I started seeing it differently. The people I work with are kind and professional. They treat me with respect, and I treat it like a job. It's not as sleazy as people think. It's business, nothing more." Her voice wavered slightly. "But it does have consequences. I don't want to stay in this industry forever. It's taken a toll on my body, my health, and my heart. If you can take care of me, if you can help me leave it behind, I will. I'll walk away from all of it for you." Her words broke through my defenses. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the vulnerability in her eyes. She wasn't just some glamorous star in a video. She was Vanessa, the woman who laughed at my bad jokes, who held my hand like it was the most precious thing in the world, who had opened her heart to me. I couldn't hate her for the choices she'd made, not when they had been born out of desperation. My heart melted. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "Okay," I said softly. "Let's leave it behind, together." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Tomorrow was our wedding day, and no matter what anyone thought, I wasn't going to let anything stop me. The wedding day arrived, and despite everything, I felt a strange sense of calm. Vanessa and I had talked late into the night, laying everything bare. I believed her. I believed in us. The ceremony was small, just like we'd planned. Family and close friends gathered at a quaint little venue downtown. Vanessa looked stunning in her gown, a vision of elegance and grace. When she walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on mine, and in that moment, I felt like the luckiest man alive. The vows were beautiful, heartfelt. For a few fleeting moments, it felt like the world had stopped, and there was nothing but the two of us. I could see the love in her eyes, and I knew I'd made the right decision. Then came the reception. The atmosphere was lively, everyone laughing, drinking, and dancing. I was finally starting to relax when the maid of honor, Vanessa's childhood friend Monica, stepped up to the microphone for her toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," Monica began, her smile wide and mischievous. "I've known Vanessa since we were kids. She's always been full of surprises, and today is no exception. In fact, I've got a little something to show you all. A glimpse into the incredible woman she is." I froze. Monica held up her phone, and before I could react, she pressed a button. The projector screen behind her flickered to life. And there it was. Clips, images, those clips, those images. Vanessa, in all her glory, with different men, in scenes that left no room for misinterpretation. Gasps erupted around the room. My mother covered her mouth in shock. My father muttered something under his breath and stood up, glaring at me. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice low and furious. "You're marrying her?" My stomach dropped. I turned to Vanessa, who was pale and trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Monica, turn it off!" Vanessa shouted, her voice breaking. Monica shrugged, her expression smug. "Oh, come on, Vanessa. You've always been proud of your work, right? Why hide it now?" The room was in chaos. Whispers, murmurs, judgmental stares. Everything I'd feared was unfolding in real time. Vanessa ran out of the room, sobbing, and I followed her without hesitation. I found her outside, leaning against the wall, her makeup streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I didn't know she'd do that. I can't believe this is happening." I hesitated, my mind racing. Inside, I could hear my father arguing with someone, demanding the wedding be called off. My friends were texting me, asking if I was okay, if I was going to go through with it. But when I looked at Vanessa, broken and vulnerable, my heart ached. "Hey," I said softly, pulling her into my arms. "It's going to be okay." She shook her head. "No, it's not. Everyone knows now. They'll never accept me. Your parents, your friends. No one will ever look at me the same way again. I ruined everything." I lifted her chin, forcing her to meet my gaze. "Listen to me. I don't care what they think. I love you, Vanessa. You're my wife. Well, almost." I smiled weakly, trying to lighten the mood. "If you still want me, I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes widened. "You mean that?" I nodded. "Yes, I don't care what anyone says. I chose you, and I'm not backing out now." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she threw her arms around me. The rest of the reception was a blur. My father stormed out, refusing to acknowledge the marriage. Some guests stayed, some didn't. But at the end of the night, Vanessa and I stood before the officiant and exchanged vows under the stars. It wasn't the perfect wedding I'd imagined, but it was real. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.